Welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the CU 2.0 podcast with big new ideas about credit unions and conversations about innovative technology with credit union and fintech leaders. This podcast is brought to you by Quillo, the real-time loan syndication network for credit unions, and by your host, longtime credit union and financial technology journalist Robert McGarvey. And now, the CU 2.0 podcast with Robert McGarvey.
The NCUA looks to be getting a new board chair, John Cruz, a longtime Washington, D.C. hand and currently Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Treasury Department. Prior jobs include Policy Director of the Senate Banking Committee and Policy Advisor to House Majority Leader Steve Scalise. This is a guy who knows his way around inside the Beltway. There's an urgency to his nomination because present NCUA Board Chair Kyle Hauptman has been named to the board of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. Hauptman also is the only member of the NCUA's current board. Yes, there are two other seats, but their occupants presently are involved in litigation and no longer serve. Will Cruz cross the finish line in the Senate and assume the top job at NCUA? On the show is Washington, D.C. lobbyist Elizabeth Ergubian, herself a former staffer at NCUA, where she served as Director of External Affairs and Communications and Policy Advisor to the chair. Before that, she was Deputy Chief Advocacy Officer and Senior Counsel at CUNA. Now she's a lobbyist on the regulatory side in Washington, D.C. She knows what's going on. She knows credit unions, and here she tells what to expect in Cruz's confirmation hearing and when to expect that hearing. Listen up. It's been 8 months since we talked.
Wow, it doesn't seem like that long.
Well, I don't think that much has happened in the last 8 months, although you're probably going to tell me I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot that's happened.
Yeah, see? Now we have a new nominee for the NCUA board chair, and both ACU and DCUC rushed to applaud this name, John Cruz. So what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, I think he seems like a good choice for the NCUA board chair. He has a lot of experience, having worked at the Department of Treasury and, also, a lot of congressional experience, worked on the House of Representatives and has many years working under the Senate Banking Committee as well as with the National Economic Council. So he definitely has the financial services experience. I like the fact that, the position that he comes from in the Department of Treasury, where he's dealing with financial institutions policies, that's a nice position because it gives one a lot of exposure to all of the different financial institutions that are, in the marketplace. And there's a lot of comparing and contrasting and seeing the unique characteristics of what's out there that you really can gain from that position. So I think that will be valuable in his position at the NCUA if he's confirmed. I know there were groups that were meeting with him well before this confirmation was announced. It was sort of like, or well before this, I should say, nomination was announced. It was like the worst kept secret that he was going to be the nominee.
Well, hey, that's the nature of DC, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aren't most secrets the worst kept?
Right. Sometimes you'll hear a rumor out there and it won't be correct, but so I always say you got to wait until the nomination actually happens because stuff could happen in the meantime. But, there were groups meeting with him during GAC, state leagues and others meeting with him.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now that was a flag. That's very interesting.
And I don't recall that before, groups meeting with a possible nominee like that, at least to the level that they were meeting with John Cruz. But there were some meetings with him around the time of GAC with various groups, even though he hadn't been nominated yet. So he has had some exposure to the industry. I think he'll do very well in the position. And in terms of carrying forward with some of the regulatory relief initiatives that Chairman Houtman has started and really, worked diligently on this year, I'm hopeful that, that will continue moving forward with a new chair, with John Crews if he becomes the chair. That said, let's say, the industry didn't like him as a pick. It's hard to come out against the chair of the NCUA, especially if you think he or she is going to get confirmed, because you're going to have to work with this individual later. So,
I think what you'd have to do, and vastly better than I, not put out a press release saying this guy's the biggest bum in the history of bums, but you start whispering to people that you knew in the Senate. I think that's what you would do, and you would try to say it in a soft whisper, not a yell.
And you'll see the national trade groups rarely will do that. They want to remain, at worst indifferent, or agnostic on the pick, and at best, supportive. But never, it's hard to really be critical of who's the nominee, because then, you set that relationship up for maybe not be as successful of a relationship if that person is confirmed and you were, on the record saying you weren't in favor of the.
Well, I wouldn't blame the guy for actually carrying a grudge or two about that.
Right.
It is certainly, I'm not going to clear my schedule, have lunch with you to talk about an urgent matter.
Right.
Talk to my assistant, maybe sometime a few months from now, I might have an open check with her. Now, on the NCUA website, I was reading this morning. This is a page there headed leadership. A 3-member board of directors oversees the NCUA's operations by blah, blah, blah. Each board member is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. No more than 2 board members can be from the same political party. We don't seem to be following much of this, do we?
Well, a lot of this is up for, court decision making at the moment, because right now we're operating under a 1-person board. There haven't been any rules, any heavy rulemakings that were finalized under just a 1-member board.
Because you don't have a quorum.
Right. And that's another interpretation. Some have said that a board of 1 is has a quorum of 1. 1 is a majority of 1. Now, I personally, and this isn't political or politics or anything. This is just, I'm a lawyer. I personally, when I read the Federal Credit Union Act, I don't interpret it that way. I interpret the quorum to be 2 people of the 3-person board. Sometimes I think, and of course, I'm not the court. Maybe a court, whatever court decides this, if it ever gets challenged, would have a different interpretation than me. I'm just sitting here on the sidelines making my interpretation, which really doesn't mean anything. But nevertheless, a court would have to decide that issue should it be challenged. I do want to flag, though, you'll hear some folks say that, well, the statute didn't expressly say that, when I took a statutory construction class in law school too. I did my time there. You also have to look at other provisions of a statute, and why would those provisions be there if it weren't for the fact you had to have 2 people being a quorum? Why would you even reference certain things if it weren't for the fact that 2 people had to make a quorum of 3? So you also, even if something's not expressly stated in a statute, like super express, which rarely happens, statutes just aren't written like that typically. You look at the rest of the language in the provisions that provides context and meaning to the whole statute and the purpose of it. So that's also important when you read a statute and when you read, legislation and trying to interpret how a court which way they will go or not go. But you're correct. We'll have to see how that plays out. And I know we have courts looking at, a case now that could impact the Humphreys executor decision about dismissing, presidential appointees, such as, folks of independent agencies, for cause or for, whether you can do it for cause or whether they're has to be, it could be not for cause. It could just be at the president's whim. So that case should be decided in probably late June or early July.
Wow.
And that's by the Supreme Court. And the district circuit court case against, having to deal with the appointment of or the dismissal of board member Todd Harper, board member Tanya Otska, that case has been, halted, waiting for the Supreme Court to decide to see what their analysis is on this, Trump v. Slaughter case, which will, interpret Humphrey's executor, which has been case law since the, FDR years. So how that case plays out, with regards to Humphrey's executor and Trump v. Slaughter will then influence the DC Circuit Court on how the case with the removal of board member Otska and board member Harper will play out. And
Now,
so we just have to wait that out.
I assume, based on his resume, that Cruz will sail through confirmation in the Senate. Wouldn't that seem reasonable?
I mean, for me, it would, because, and you'll see this with a lot of nominees, especially in financial services, you see a lot of former Senate banking staffers. They have the contacts in the Senate. They have developed those relationships with, all of the senators. So, they also have the expertise because they worked on financial, services issues. So because of the knowledge and the relationships that they've established, they tend to go through confirmation, easier than maybe somebody who doesn't have those relationships. So if you want somebody that's smart and you think will have an easier time going through confirmation, getting a former Senate staffer, someone who had a, professional position within the Senate on the banking committee, for example, is a good way to go. And you could see that with board member Otska. She also, worked for, Senate banking. Former Chairman Harper and board member Harper worked for the House of Representatives in financial services for years. Those types of candidates have developed the relationships that really allow them to be confirmed in an easier way.
Now, I wouldn't think that Cruz would be something that Democrats on the committee would hate, or Democrats in the Senate. There might be a few, but he's not. He looks to me like a pretty experienced guy working the Hill who probably can get along with both members of both parties. That would be my guess.
I would think the same. And like I said, when you worked for the Senate Banking Committee or some of these other committees, you have to work with everybody. And you've developed relationships on both sides, Republicans and Democrats. And if you're successful and you're smart, those relationships are good ones. So people are going to remember you and think of you fondly. Again, it puts him at an advantage over somebody that maybe, came from the industry or came from another type of position that doesn't have those relationships, but is a Democrat or a Republican. In that case, you haven't developed a personal relationship with that person. So you might just really hang on to the Democrat side or the Republican side and support or oppose them based on that. But when you're somebody who has worked with all of these people, presumably, and they know you in a different way, and they know you're smart, that really is an advantage. So that's why you'll see former Senate staffers, people that have served their time in the Senate, they tend to be pretty successful as nominees, and they do have an easier confirmation.
And I'm sure he knows how to be appropriately respectful to particularly the senior senators when he's being in the confirmation hearing.
Right.
Which not all department secretaries at this point in time seem to have absorbed that message.
Right. Presumably, he's had to work these types of hearings.
Exactly. He knows how to talk with these guys.
And it's interesting because when I worked at the NCUA, the Office of External Affairs and Communications, that was the office I was director of, we help the nominees, through this process. So, providing them briefing materials and things that are public, has to be public information because they haven't been confirmed yet. but just background information and sort of help them through the process of getting confirmed. And that could be, depending on who's in charge of that office, that could be a variety of things. It could be actually having, practice hearings with them, like when you're pretending to be the senators and asking them questions and how they respond to those questions, really practicing with them at that level. It could be providing them, really extensive briefing books. It could be taking them around and introducing them to members. Maybe there's a few senators that they don't know, or maybe they'd like to have a further conversation with and answer any questions for them. It could be taking them around to those kinds of visits. So there's a whole process that very likely is happening before you have your hearing and before you have a Senate vote.
When do you think there would be a Senate vote?
It's hard to say. You have to see where their calendar falls and how quickly they get this through. I would think, hopefully before the end of the year, but there's always a chance that some of these things get delayed. I know with board member Otska, when she was nominated, hers was very quick. Again, she was a Senate staffer, worked for the banking committee. She was nominated, I remember around September and maybe confirmed later that year, November or December. So, and I remember thinking that was a pretty fast moving process. This one could take a little longer, but I would hope it'd be before the end of the year.
Well, I think Hauptman certainly hopes it would be before the end of the year. So, I think he wants to get on with the next phase of his life.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure. I'm sure he's enjoyed his time at the NCUA. He's certainly done a lot of great work.
Well, that's a question, and you might not know the answer to this, but Hauptman got support for some pretty strong positions he took, support from credit union people. And I'm thinking particularly of crypto and stablecoin, things like that. And also some steps to loosen some regulations on credit unions. Now, there's no indication of how Cruz falls on these issues, I don't think.
I would guess that he's probably very consistent with current Chairman Hauptman on a lot of these positions, because a lot of Chairman Hauptman's positions, especially on the deregulation side and looking at all of the regulations and trying to streamline them, take out things that are superfluous and unnecessary, or language that's guidance that's in the Code of Federal Regulations, which really it doesn't belong there because it's not a legal requirement. He's been very careful about going through this process of looking through all of these rules and making these changes. And there's been dozens of rulemakings, something like 20 plus rulemakings the last few months. And this is all consistent with the president's executive orders that he's put forth on streamlining regulations and simplifying the process for the industry. So, Chairman Hauptman's been consistent with what the president's direction has been. I'm presuming that, Mr. John Cruz will, as a presidential, nominee, will also be consistent with the president's directive. And so we'll keep that process going that Chairman Hauptman has made so much progress on this year.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting was that when Hauptman was the only board member, credit union people that I talked with all seemed to really have some respect for the guy, which was interesting because these were people of both parties, if you will. That's unusual in today's Washington, D.C. Right.
I think the NCUA is unique as an agency because I find that with even, with the other board members as well, with board member Otska and former chairman, now and former board member Todd Harper, who was chair, they garnered a lot of respect too. I think that the NCUA as an agency, they do care about credit unions. I've always had the impression that the board members, you may not always agree with their policy positions, but they want to do what's right for credit unions. I think they have, a vested interest in this industry, and they want to see it succeed. And I'm not saying that there would be somebody on there that wouldn't, but I just noticed there is with NCUA, especially as opposed to some of the other regulators, I think I see that that willingness to really listen to the industry a little bit more. Now, again, that doesn't mean they're going to do what the industry wants. I mean, that's their job as a regulator. That's their job, is to do what's best for credit union members, what's best for the economic system and the safety and soundness of credit unions. And, an individual credit union may not always agree with those policy positions. But that said, I feel like, looking at all the other financial regulators, I feel like the NCUA is very open to listening to feedback from the industry and hearing them out on issues. And you don't always see that. And I think that does contribute to them getting that level of respect from the industry, even if someone might not agree with a policy position. I think that respect is still there because that the board members were thoughtful, that they did hear all sides of and all positions before making decisions.
The only people I've talked to, and this goes back many years, who really are antagonistic towards NCUA are people who were in credit unions that were conserved. It's as simple as that. And they thought it was wrongful. I'm not taking positions on whether it was right or wrong. I'm just saying these people were the only ones who really were mad at NCUA. Were some people mildly mad at, yeah, sure. But I worked in the oil industry for some years. There wasn't a single person who liked the EPA, for instance. I did, but I was an outlier. So they didn't like federal regulators at all. Whereas I don't, there isn't that same sense of who the hell are these people to tell us what we're doing that among credit union people, which is good, I think.
Right.
So,
I mean, yeah, you're not everyone. Again, your job, you're a regulator. Your job isn't for everyone to love you. You're going to have to make some hard decisions, some difficult decisions. You're going to have to make some people angry sometimes. And that's just the way it is. I mean, you have the objective of protecting the safety and soundness of the credit union system. That's your job. Your job is to also protect the share insurance fund and make sure credit union members are protected and have that they trust their financial institutions, that they trust their credit unions. So, I mean, that's the job, not making people happy. Now, if you're able to work with the industry on things and issues and hear them out and have some constructive relationships with them, I think that's great. And I think the NCUA typically does have that kind of relationship where they will listen to the industry, listen to other stakeholders. I was, pretty surprised working there at the level of outreach that all of the board members had with the various leagues and credit union groups and consumer groups, all stakeholders. They really wanted to listen and hear all of the positions that could help them make their decisions, on the board. And that's all three of them were like that when I worked there. So, I think that does help the NCUA in terms of getting respect from people because they know they're considering all the information that they can before making policy decisions. But I also understand that, you're getting conserved, you're a credit union, you're probably not going to be happy with anybody at that point. I mean, that's just things happen, mistakes are made, and it's not a pretty process to go through. So I could imagine there'd be some grievances with
it's
everybody.
Analogous to if your creditors force you into bankruptcy. And
Right.
usually if you're in that position, you hate everybody.
I could understand why some credit unions may feel the way they do based on the circumstances that they have to face.
And generally the cases that I looked into, I thought the NCUA had made pretty rational decisions about conserving the institution. Not
Right.
in
Those
every
decisions
case
were always-
that I looked into, but the vast majority, I would have said, hey, pull the plug on this sucker. So,
Those decisions are very difficult to make. And I could tell you based on my experience working there, I can't imagine. It's not even comprehensible to me to think that those decisions were made without a lot of hours of thought and care and wanting to do the right thing. Like, it's just that I worked for that agency. They want to get it right. And I can't imagine that any of those decisions were made lightly, especially when you have board members and a chair like, Houtman, that they don't want to see credit unions go away. I mean, they want to see credit unions thrive. This is what they talk about all the time. They want to see them be successful, and they want more of them. They don't want to see consolidation in the industry or credit unions having to close up shop.
Now, what years were you at NCUA?
I was there from 2022 to 2025.
Now, big question. When we talked last year, there had been rumbling that I don't think came to anything to basically eliminate NCUA and throw credit unions under somebody in Treasury or someone in another federal agency. That seems to be totally off the table at this point, right?
I haven't heard conversation about that. I don't want to say something's totally off the table because there's always conversation about restructuring the financial regulators. That's always kind of a low rumble. A lot of times you'll hear those types of conversations pick up and become louder during, an administration change where we're now looking at everything and anything's on the table because you have a new president or you have maybe a change in Congress. So political changes tend to, whether they should or shouldn't, bring up those conversations because everyone's thinking, oh, there's this big political shift. That means all of these things could change. Anything could change. And then the conversation starts again. Once you start to examine, the structure further, let's say you want to make a decision, okay, let's consolidate. And then when you start to examine like what that entails and what that would mean and the complications involved with that and the transition involved with that, and you see what a colossal project that would be with probably not a lot of any success, then at that point, new folks in charge take a step back and say, okay, maybe we table that for now and kind of keep things going. Now, does that mean it's tabled permanently? No, because those conversations, even when you don't have a political shift, those conversations become loud again if there's some sort of crisis that makes them loud, like, the financial crisis where we got rid of the OTS, the Office of Thrift Supervision. Something that's so catastrophic, so overwhelming, gets a lot of, public attention and touches everybody in this country. At that point, when you have something that major, then those conversations start up again. And that could happen at any time. You can't predict when that will pop up or not. There could be a huge cybersecurity incident that is just absolutely catastrophic, that has a, incredible impact on, let's say, credit unions or let's say banks. And then that goes viral and there's a run on financial institutions. And that causes this public hysteria, which could then cause lawmakers to look at the system and say, hey, we need to reevaluate how things are working. There's been a lot of, I know the streamlining, some of that is really positive, but on the other hand, a lot of staff positions have been eliminated in agencies such as the NCUA and other agencies. And that works when it works. But when there's a problem or where there's an incident where you need all hands on deck and you have a staff that's, a team that's 20, 30% less than it was a few years ago, and you're still in the transition of reacclimating and reallocating that workload, and something big happens, often you're not prepared for it. And that could cause public attention. And then lawmakers to then say, maybe we should look at things a little more closely.
What's your sense? We talked last year about the staff reductions, say 20+% in NCUA headcount. How has that shaken out? You seem to have indicated so far so good.
I mean, any type of situation where you eliminate staff is it in the early years, it could be, or early months at least, it could be fine because nothing, things have been kind of status.
So, and what if we have another corporate credit union meltdown?
Right. I mean, then
what?
Yeah, that's right. That's where you have the issue. It's not when there's no rain outside. It's when there's the hurricane and now you don't have anybody working. Yeah. So that's where you have an issue. It's when something that's not the status quo happens, and having that deeper bench, having all of those people there and all of those people with the the institutional knowledge that they have really does help in those situations. And when you don't have that in a situation that pops up, you are extremely vulnerable as an agency. Now, let's say that situation never pops up, then you're fine.
These issues are often arcane too. I mean, you might say, "Oh well, we'll just put an ad in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal to hire recent MBAs from Harvard, and we'll be fine. We can hire as many people as we want." That's partly true, but they don't know anything about corporate credit unions. And it's such an arcane subject. I mean, it took me, that was my beat at Credit Union Times for a while. It took me months to figure out what the damn things we're doing.
Yeah.
It's a natural person credit union. And come on, what are you talking about here?
I get a kick out of that where people, I always tell people when they're saying, well, they have this education and they've never worked for a credit union, but they went to Harvard. And I always say, you know what, then their mommy and daddy must be very proud of them that they went to Harvard. And that doesn't matter. It's all about exposure. I don't care how smart you are. If you haven't been exposed to the industry, if you haven't seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and experienced it and know it and have the context and understand the nuance, which you're not going to learn in a classroom. You have to actually learn that in the field, learn it, working it, getting your hands dirty, staying up late night, reading, going through different scenarios. None of that you're going to learn at Harvard. You went to Harvard. You're so smart. God bless you. I agree. That's fantastic. But for purposes of working at an agency and really understanding it, it takes years of dealing with institutions, seeing things happen, being exposed to unusual things and how you manage them, being exposed to working with different types of teams, different types of leadership. You can't learn that getting a Harvard MBA. You actually have to be in the agency doing it. So when some of these folks with all this institutional knowledge leave, I always get nervous about that because that's years of somebody becoming an expert at something. Now they're at the years where they know this stuff inside and out. They dream it, they breathe it. They don't even have to read about it because they know it so well. And then they leave the agency and you're starting from scratch to build that up with a newer line of professionals. So that does make me nervous. It really does. Now, again, if everything's fine, there's no issues that pop up, we're on autopilot, it might be not an issue. It's when something different, not status quo, happens where that perspective, having that institutional knowledge, having those perspectives, having those years of experience really do help get you through those situations. And a bunch of young, or not even young, but a bunch of folks that don't have a lot of credit union experience, but they got the education, that ain't going to fly.
Now, is now the time, or is it too early, where you personally, representing clients of yours, want to talk with Mr. Crews?
I know some folks have had those conversations. I mean, if I'm talking to clients, I would say wait until the individual is confirmed, let them get through that process, let them, really study up on that, and then, let them get at the NCUA for a little while and then have those conversations. Of course, you could always touch base and introduce yourself and then have those conversations. But I don't know if that's not something I would pursue right now because he still has to go through the whole process of being confirmed. And right now, especially if you're someone who wants that to happen, you want him to concentrate on that process and not taking meetings that aren't necessary.
His current position, did that require confirmation?
I am not sure. I want to say it did. I'm not sure. It could have. I mean, there's some positions, high-level positions at Treasury that do not. But they're political appointees. Like my position at OEAC, I was a political appointee, but I did not require Senate confirmation. And I want to say his was like that too, but I could be incorrect.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, if you've been confirmed before, there's a good possibility you'll be confirmed again. Dirt tends to surface in a confirmation process.
Right. But even if he hadn't been, which I'm guessing he hadn't been, but I could be incorrect. Even if he had not been, this is somebody that should not have a hard time.
No, I was reading the guy's resume yesterday saying, Well, if I were in the Senate, I'd be hard pressed not to vote for him.
Right.
So
And I
it's
mean, these folks do, and I've said this to some of my conversations and speeches in the industry. They're smart, they're qualified, they're great. I think he's going to do a great job. I would like to, at some point, when we're not so politically fractured, see some folks from the industry get on the NCUA board, and not because of the politics have to pick somebody who has those relationships because they worked for the Senate, they worked for the staff. I mean, this is great. He's very knowledgeable. I'm sure he'll do a great job. But it would be nice. I mean, the Federal Credit Union Act allows for somebody, at least one, allows for one board member to come directly from the industry as a board, former credit union board member or credit union leader, and serve on the board. And that industry knowledge is critical. And the fact that we haven't really had that in a while, because we get these former government officials because they worked for the Senate and they could get confirmed easily because they have developed those relationships. I mean, a more diverse board, I think, should have at least one person that had no political experience, did not work on the Hill in DC, but understands credit unions, worked for the industry, knows how a credit union works, knows how an exam works. I mean, I would love to have a board member that's been through a credit union exam on the other side. That's like my dream, because that perspective could really help the NCUA board, but we're just not getting that. We're getting board members that are former Senate staff.
I totally agree with you. I think it'd be very good for NCUA to have a former senior executive at probably a very big credit union on the board. And look, CUNA has always liked. Well, CUNA flips. It seems to alternate between political professionals and non-political professionals as head of the organization. The political people seem to have done okay at CUNA. I don't see why they couldn't make for a good regulator. Actually, that's a good suggestion. It's something to ponder. So
it is. And I mean, to me, the fact that the Federal Credit Union Act says, only one could come makes me think that the drafters thought, oh, everyone's going to want someone from the industry on the board, so we're going to limit it to one. When in reality, none of them, it's the opposite. Like we can't get any of those individuals on the board because they seem to have to come from the Hill so that they can get confirmed, because they've already developed the relationships with all the offices that are going to vote in favor of them or against them. So, I don't think that's what was contemplated when the Federal Credit Union Act was written. Otherwise, I don't think they would have said only one.
Right. No, you're right about that. And you don't want regulatory agencies to be dominated by the regulated. It's fine for there to be a voice of the regulated among the board members, but you don't want all of them to be from that.
Absolutely not. No, it's having a good mixture of folks that understand what's happening in the field and folks that understand policy is good. I mean, I think that's positive.
Now, do you see anything? Is anything significant coming down the pike from a regulatory perspective, which is your beat, that will affect credit unions? Are we still in a kind of wait and see, hold them position?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of regulatory changes that have been proposed by, the current board. A lot of them are proposing smaller changes, but there's many of them. So it's a massive deregulation effort. And even though some of those changes, per proposal are not major changes, I think taken together, if you take all of these 20 plus proposals and put them all together in your own mind, it is a lot of things, a lot of streamlining that could help the industry quite a bit if that's what we're looking for. And I think some of it, I think a lot of it is helping the industry without, any negative impact to the safety and soundness of credit unions, because you always got to look at that. You also have the agency looking at writing the regulations to implement the Genius Act for purposes of credit unions issuing stable coins and holding stable coins and how that's going to work. And that's And that's a big one that's happening right now. You have all of the agencies, federal agencies, looking at BSA and AML requirements, Bank Secrecy Act, and how to reevaluate those requirements for the industry. And I think there's more collaboration among the federal regulators on that project. So that's a pretty major project. I would say that project and then the Genius Act regulations are your two very, very big projects right now. I think John Cruz, in his role at Treasury, probably worked heavily on both of those things. I think so that will be very helpful as he takes over, if he takes over at the NCUA. But those are the two that are two big issues I expect to take a lot of time and energy from the agencies this year, and the industry should be really weighing in on those proposals. Some of them are, I know there's another Genius Act proposed rule coming out soon from the NCUA. They already have one that the industry has commented on, but that's going to be, ongoing throughout the year.
Yeah, stablecoin is really becoming very, very trendy in the credit union business. There are other crypto Bitcoin, et cetera, not so much. They are entirely different beasts.
Right.
And stablecoin is definitionally stable. So,
right.
Whereas Bitcoin, and I own some Bitcoin, this is the most volatile damn thing I've ever owned. I'm ahead, so I'm not complaining, but man, I've never seen such ups and downs. When Cruz's name was being bounced around in DC as a possible NCUA board chair or board member, and you don't have to tell me the names, were there any other names being bounced around too? Or was he the only one?
No, I heard some other names as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure there were other folks.
They could be in the pipeline also, I assume.
Right. I mean, something could always happen with the nominee. They could get sick. They could, who knows when it's decide they don't want to be the nominee. I mean, there's always things that could happen.
Is there anything stopping the administration from nominating someone to fill one of the two vacant seats?
I think
I know that's tied up in the courts, but
right. That's my guess. That folks are kind of waiting to see how that plays out before.
Well, you might not want to take the job either, because then the Supreme Court decision might come down and you might be out of a job. And
right. Well, also,
do I really need this aggravation? So
absolutely, and going through. I mean, I've had this conversation with many people, and in my public talking and speeches to folks in the industry when they ask about the Washington perspective, and I let them know going through the confirmation process is not a piece of cake. You have to really read up on a lot of things. If you don't have relationships with the individuals that are going to be voting for you, hopefully, you have to develop those relationships. You have to meet with officers.
That's why I think Cruz, with his resume, man, I'd give the guy an A. Just I'd say he's going to ace this test. It's right. Maybe I'm optimistic, but just that resume, my eyes just exploded as I was reading this. I said, this guy sounds perfect. I mean, and as I said some time ago, I don't see Democrats lining up to oppose him. There might be one or two, but he's a good guy. I mean, he's worked with these very same people, the very same committees. Right. And the Senate is, and you know this better than I, but it's an extremely private club. But right. He knows the club, how it functions, what the unwritten rules are. He knows all that stuff. I don't know. I think he's a terrific choice. It's unlike some of the people that have been sent up to the Hill to be confirmed to her. You go, where did these guys come from? What planet?
Yeah. I certainly think he will he understands the issues now. He will bring a really positive perspective. And yeah, I'm hopeful that he'll continue with a lot of the looking at the regulations and examining them and some of the cleanup effort that's helped, from a compliance standpoint. So I think, for purposes of the industry, it's a good decision. And I wish him really good luck if he gets the confirmation.
Before we go, think hard about how you can help support this podcast so we can do more interviews with more thoughtful leaders in the credit union world. What we're trying to figure out here in these podcasts is what's next for credit unions. What can they do to really, really, really make a difference in the financial scene? Can't all be mega banks, can it? It's my hope it won't all be mega banks. It'll always be a place for credit unions. That's what we're discussing here. So figure out how you can help. Get in touch with me. This is rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Robert McGarvey again. That's rjmcgarvey@gmail.com. Get in touch. We'll figure out a way that you can help. We need your support. We want your support. We thank you for your support. The CU 2.0 podcast.